I just started the recording and I want to welcome you all to a conversation around risk management. And this is really an intro conversation and part of a two-part series where we really want to talk about what are the biggest challenges we're seeing in risk coming up in our convening. And we're going to do a little bit of exploration around all of the topics and areas that we see come up. And then I want to talk in the second part of this conversation about what are some universal practices and truths that apply that we can learn from. And Heather Mason, I'm super excited that you're on this call. Running Caspian Agency, which really, like, this is the sweet spot that you all work in, is how to mitigate risk, how to plan for the unexpected. And I know you've had some really big successes in dealing with it. Especially with the Skull World Forum, with Omidyar, with a lot of big impact conveners in this space. So thank you for being here. And I want to just get us started by asking the question, what don't we know or plan for when we're talking about risk? And what have you seen? Maybe Heather, you can start it off.
Sure. I mean, I think one thing that we've seen change over the last, I would say, 10 years quite markedly is there's always requirements for a risk plan for, let's say, audiovisual teams that come in and have to do rigging, and that's expected. But at least in all the publications I'm seeing, there's finally a real movement that every single conference and convening needs to have actually a codified document, a written plan around risk management and hitting the big mitigation, contingencies, insurance, and communication and crisis communication plans, and really ticking off those boxes, and then also making sure that the insurance companies are well aware of that so that that can be managed and accounted for, especially if there is a crisis. I think the other things that are popping up that we might not plan for is currency exchange rates. We work internationally a lot. And that's changing. Brexit is going to change, I think, some things for us because we're VAT registered in the UK, but a lot of times we can use that to our benefit to become VAT registered very quickly in the EU. I don't know that that will be the case, and that's a 20% savings for our clients off of event management, off of vendor fees. So that can add up to $20 to $50 to $200,000 in savings or not, and that's a definite risk. I think the other risk is climate change is causing a lot of issues, both with weather for planes, with flooding in different places, with heat, and now you have to get fans and air conditioning at times in the year you didn't always have to. That's a cost implication. And then I would say the other big thing domestically is that I'm seeing in all the publications are these active shooter drills. Active shooters, a lot more security. I mean, outdoor events. I mean, we all know they're hard to do anyway, but now I would say they're especially hard. And if you look at the Gilroy Garlic Festival, they had fencing, but I think there's going to be a lot of discussion of was that fencing strong enough because there was a hole in the fence. So who's now liable and what kind of searching? And we used to be very infrequent about wand checks and bag checks. I think those are going to become that's going to become a demand in a lot of places by, if nothing else, the insurance companies about whether you're able to get insured if you don't have wands or bag checks. So I think there's lots of areas where risk is starting to grow. And then not to mention just risk in supply, demand, hotels, rooms, etc.
Mm-hmm. That's a hefty list from...
Yeah, sorry. Those are the things I was thinking off the top of my head, sadly.
This is why we have you talking about this. I mean, I think from the risk plan around looking at contingencies, also, insurance, that's a big topic that a lot of people have to deal with. And currency exchanges, climate, I think the climate in our environment is, and also politically and socially is a huge topic.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, David, I mean, what was exciting to you about this topic and what resonates with you?
It's fun. I actually wasn't that interested in this topic And it's fun hearing your list of things, Heather, because like I didn't think of them. So, that's helpful. I just wanted to hop on and hear what people were talking about and meet some folks.
Awesome.
And the convening stuff I do, we've done a number of unconferences. We try to do kind of open spacey things. And, the line I was thinking of is whatever happens is supposed to happen. But I think that probably we need to be a little bit more, thoughtful about catastrophes going forward. And the things I was first thinking about were kind of interactions within the community, kind of like, because we want to do discussion based thing. What happens when the discussions go really awry?
I think that's another topic that's really good as far as bringing it down to the micro level, because those are two ends of the spectrum, right? Of what's happening overall convening and then what's happening in one-on-one or group conversations. Avery was at a convening out here in California this summer and would be happy, I think, to talk about some of her learnings from that experience, but high level, just share. There was a challenge around misconduct with kids, and planners did not know how to manage it. They were also at a space where Wi-Fi physically was not reliable. And so if you can't look up the best practices on the spot and you can't call the people you need to call to get specific expertise, what do you do? So I'm curious, like, what would you do in that situation?
Yeah. Was that for me or David?
I think for all of us, like,
yeah.
At the different ends of the spectrum, like how do you plan for that? What I hear you saying, Heather, early on is like, there's a risk plan and a mitigation plan that's needed early on. So how ahead of time about things that come up in one-off conversations?
Yeah, well, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't even mention the Me Too movement. I mean, we've definitely had issues with misconduct at conferences in the past, and that was always brought up. In fact, again, pre-Me Too, that was almost okay and expected. When I was working at Charles Schwab, the sales guys would go to Vegas, and that was all fine. It was almost like 1960s, Mad Men, sadly. And now I'm really glad, I think all of us are, that is not looked on appropriately anymore. So I would say most conferences that we see, ours included, must have a code of conduct policy that is distributed. It's also agreed upon in the registration process. So before you get on site, you're agreeing. Now, I'm putting Me Too in the spotlight, but it goes across all conduct because, TED has a great one, I think, that just talks about how you're expected to interact with people and also how you interact with people you disagree with, that you have a conflict with. And that it notes who you go to and what is the escalation policy and what are the policies around that should anyone trespass against a very clear criteria. And of course, it's going to be muddy because one person's disagreement is another person's, highly charged debate. But I think the big thing is who do you go to? What's the plan? What's the process? What's the policy? And I think where it really gets sticky is when people get thrown out. And are they thrown out? One of our conferences specifically is someone was asked to leave for, I would say, a Me Too moment. It wasn't as severe as it could be, so that's good. It was, I would say, on the not that Me Too is ever fun, but it was more in a manageable Me Too area, but he was asked to leave the conference. Now, the big question is, does he get to come back? Is he banned from the community? Is he banned from the conference? Is there redemption? So that I don't think we've figured out, and I haven't seen a best practice around that part. I would say we had a very good process to remove him from the conference. That's the nice part is it actually worked. Our whole process worked. Our escalation plan worked. But now the one thing I hadn't thought about, and I feel like I do a lot of prep, is what happens to that human? So I don't know if anybody's gone through there or has even any thought. I think that's a complex one. And especially for the person who reported it, if he does come back, does that human then say, I don't want to come back? That part I think is not.
Exactly.
Right. What have we said, and not us as an organization, but the organization we're working for, that he may get to come back? So I think that's a really hard one. And you're right, I think that's more often the things that are going to pop up. And it could have been just a conflict. Like, what if he yelled at somebody and they felt very unsafe or threatened? I think it's that same place. I don't know if you guys have thoughts. I'd be curious.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts, David, and I just want to bring this back to the theme which we're talking about right now, which to me is how do we source the questions that we don't yet know the answers to? And so this is one really great question of what do you do for people who aren't appropriately following the norms and codes of conduct that we're setting out, even when we are prepared on the front end of things? I'm curious, David, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, that's a fantastic one. And it's like conferences are a microcosm of like society, right? We haven't really answered that with society. It seems like, you know, my assumption has been we need kind of a restorative justice approach. And so I probably look to some kind of a restorative framing, but I have no idea. I don't know anybody that's doing it for conferences, and, you know, not doing it very well in most of society. So, I was just Googling around for the TED principles, and I didn't find them. I'd love to see them if anybody knows where those are. I didn't spot them in my quick Google, but I think that would be a really helpful to kind of have compiled some basic set of, you know,
code of conduct policies.
Conduct, yeah, maybe that I didn't look for that.
So I really like what you're saying around the restorative framing. Tell me more about how you see that.
Well, from what I understand of kind of restorative justice as a practice, there is the circle kind of, there's a process where the offender and the offendee kind of get to have a conversation in the community, and the intent is to restore the relationship so that, the circle is restored. And, there's techniques and people who are skilled at it who I look to for that kind of thing and hope it doesn't happen, so that I don't have to do it, so somebody else can do it. But, just the notion that the point of the community is to kind of maintain itself intact. And so if you break the code of conduct, there's some process for being readmitted, I guess. And there is an actual process that we're seeing used in schools and some in the legal system.
I like that. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, because to me, the just you're out forever approach, I think, is a little too, can be too aggressive in certain instances. And because we're playing in, I think, an area where the degrees of severity are going to be varied. If it's on a lower degree of severity, and I'm not saying I'm the one to determine that, but I think using the same penalty, I mean, we don't do that in the justice system anyway. We don't, you don't go for life for, a speeding ticket, and so I would agree. I think there's something in the middle there, but because it's relationships and because it's conferences, and I think because we're all in the social justice space, I like the idea of using that as a technique. Yeah.
I want to highlight what you both referenced, which was relationships. And for me, the foundation of a relationship is trust. And if you've lost trust, how do you build it back? And I think, Heather, as a conference organizer and leader in a convening, you essentially are holding so much trust of the organizers, your partners, the attendees, the participants, the partner, just everyone. You can plan as much as you want, and trust can be lost like that.
That's exactly it. And yeah, I think one of the things I'm always surprised that no matter how much coaching and advocating and recommending we do, that first of all, we're big in professional MCs, not necessarily organizational MCs, but this could be, I would say, either person's role. But leading from a stage has so much power that whether a professional MC says it or whether the organizational head wants to say it and is gifted in saying this, someone needs to set the frame from the stage. And I don't know why there is so much shyness and hesitation. I think it actually builds liability to say, hey, if we are creating, in a sense, like you said, David, a microcosm of society here. And any microcosm of society must have rules of engagement for how we're all going to operate. And I think that and we accept this everywhere we go. So why do we hesitate? And I'm not saying us here necessarily, but we just hit over and over again. And I'll say, from the stage, you should set the tone, set the attitudes, and set the code of conduct. And if it varies, you need to get back up on the stage again. And I would say it's maybe happened once in one of our conferences. Or I go to conferences where it happens, which I love, where they say, this is how we're going to operate. This is how we're going to, and you know what? Everybody buys into it, or the majority, but then it's very clear to the peers. You've now created a peer culture of enforcement. And I feel like if we just go, we're all going to go to a conference and here's your brochure of how you should act. Hope you read it. Like all the emails you ignored from us. Hope you read that. No, all you have to do is stand up on stage and say it. And you know what happens? If you were like, everybody has to wear a red hat today, and we got red hats, everybody does it. So, and I think that would cut down a lot on, not all, because you're still going to get your outliers. You're still going to have human conflict. It's still society. But I think then you have an army of people behind you saying, we bought into this and we're going to help enforce this with you. I think that's important.
I like that. Yeah, kind of. It's like you're making me realize that just the role of kind of you're offering people some level of safety.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of the. I mean, it's like I was funny because I was thinking like it's not a safe space, but that's not what we're offering.
Right.
But
right.
but there is a level of safety that want to be able to provide.
I like that too. And as you were talking, Heather, I was thinking about examples of when I've been to convenings where on stage the culture was enforced and the norms and the trust was built in a consistent way. So this might be a good point to transition to talking about examples of where we do or don't see what we're talking about around kind of empowering people to come back into a space and, this kind of restorative engagement question. And then also, liability of whose liability is it? Is it the leaders? How do we enforce and support this level of safety? And I think earlier this year, I was at 1440 Multiversity in Santa Cruz, and Conscious Company Media, which the parent company, Intentional Media, who are just amazing, they put on a World Changing Women Summit, and it was 2.5 days, and the MC was fantastic at empowering the participants. So hundreds and hundreds of people to be able to let down our guard, to speak up in an authentic voice, and to name when something didn't feel comfortable. And then there was follow-up around what outlets could you go to, where are staff that you could ask for help in certain situations. This is a little bit of a tangent from risk, but it's more around this topic of how is the leadership showing up to ensure safety in norms.
I love that. And I love the fact that there's such a good example of that, because you're right. Once you see it, you're like, why don't we all do it? And that's why I always get confused that why is it left for, again, let's see how regular society plays out in our microcosm. Well, it plays out like regular society. It's not going to do anything different unless you change it. And the thing I like that you really said, which it reminds me that I need to be conscious too, is when you give people tools and words to use that, they'll adopt the language of the temporary culture you give them. And you see it. It's like in some, as easy as it is, when it's like, when I raise my hand, everybody raises their hand, everybody's quiet. That's a tiny little, I can't do that in a grocery store, but in a conference, I absolutely can. And everyone buys in that this is now our norm. And now I've given everyone a way.
I bet it'll work.
I'm going to try it at the grocery store. Hey, everybody. But if you give people tools and words, because we none of us have been equipped, or I haven't, a lot of us haven't been equipped with the types of words you use when you feel threatened, when you feel like there's a conflict happening. And if you give people words and tags that they can hold on to, then everyone's speaking in the same quote language. Like, hey, this is a time where I need to take a break, or I'm feeling triggered, or whatever. This is not my specialty. I would hire someone to tell me what the words should be. But in my very abrupt way, kind of like, this is trigger, so everyone gets to take a break, or this is this, or this is that. And I think that's really helpful. And I do think it goes into risk because, man, this stuff ricochets to the organizer really fast, as you know, David.
Well, and I think that, I suspect that, especially in the Me Too context, that like women have been putting up with shit at conferences for a long time and just assuming that what was supposed to happen at a conference, basically. Less tolerated, right? This is going to be much more of an issue going forward now that people are feeling, they realize they're authorized to say something about it. And so, if it hasn't been a problem at conferences in the past, it's going to be, because it's going to be.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And to me, that goes right back to, there's a word for it now. In the past, we just had to say, like, this sucks because I don't own my own body and everybody apparently has access to it whenever they'd feel like it. And making me feel uncomfortable is totally fine. Now, you go hashtag me too, everybody's like, oh, I get it. And it's like, yes, it's a word, and it's been given all this power of, this is not okay now. And I think that's why it's been really freeing to women. And I think you can put those on in other situations as well, that, hey, this is a time where I feel like if we're, dichotomous differences on an issue, what is that word that allows us to go, okay, we need to find another way of communicating around. I mean, we're in areas that are really hard to talk about: climate change, population growth, smallholder farmers versus deforestation versus environment. I mean, these are fraught topics that probably deserve their own little hashtag Me Too moments of like triggering.
Well, I think you both bring up a really important issue, which is what's ahead in this space. And you said it, David, there are new and more spaces for women to engage differently. And Heather, I think your point too, now that there are tools, languages, and just different diction that we're all respecting, not necessarily that we have all the same understanding, but we're coming to understand what is, what else is there? And so I'm curious, like, what else are you seeing? I mean, you just talked about climate change, you talked about a lot of different topics. What I see as what's ahead is this kind of new wave of empowerment of women in convenings. And I think the voice is a huge topic. Like, what else do you think, like, if you had to say impact convening, what's ahead, these are the top two things that, you're excited about? I mean, is it climate, socio-political aspects, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think where I'm excited about and what I think the risk is are really close together. I think everything we're seeing in politics is absolutely coming into almost every conference. And in fact, we're doing an employee recognition event, which we rarely do. We stick in the social good, but we know somebody who knows somebody. And it's interesting, just even an employee gathering, corporate 2-day gathering to get to know distributed teams. The thing they brought up was, you need to be aware that, part of our team is probably red state and part of our team is blue state. And we need to manage that we don't let them get, because that's not what the conference is about. Conference is about this product that they create. The company is just a company, software company. And we don't need to wade into any moments where the employees will start arguing about politics. And so that's a risk. The place where I see that there could be a lot of growth is, I think that there's been an awesome wave towards diversity and very conscious thinking around, first the wave of, hey, Manals, let's see if we can get some women in there. And now I think the wave, which has gone every single other, it's always about voting, pay. I mean, you can chart these things. Now it's about diversity around racial, sexual preference identity, regional, geographic. We're looking into all these other diversities, which makes me really happy. I think that next wave, kind of around that whole politics thing, will be intellectual diversity. And I think having to manage through that will be very important as an opportunity for those of us in the positive world change, social change. If we don't get that right, if we don't start to figure out a way to manage and encourage that diversity and give words and tools to that, I think that's a big risk, I think, for the world. Because I know I've seen a big split, and I think we've seen that happening not just here, but around the entire world. You could go country to country. So I think that's what I see ahead, is more, I hope, of a focus on all of those prisms and adding that last prism in is going to be important. And then managing to that prism, because huge risks there. That's my thought. What about you, David?
Again, I think that your example of the company is really interesting. And I suspect, well, so I mean, two levels. One is I think that we do need to have, I was just listening to, a podcast with Michael Sandel talk about the need to have, better civic engagement and more, the red-blue divide is so stark. And I think, most of the events I go to don't have much red in them. And it's weird, right? Because I feel like in some sense, the very concept of civility has become part of the argument. So a Trump rally, right? Where the goal is to be not civil in some sense, right? You're rewarded for being an asshole. I don't know where you go with that, right? I mean, I don't know how you do a convening, and that's part of the ethos. I'm going to put a tweet in the chat that I just saw that made me think about this problem where, kind of part of the pride of what I perceive of as the pride of kind of of Red America is it's owning a libtard, and I don't know how you live with that in an event framework. So the intent
is owning a what? Sorry, you clicked out for a second.
Owning the libtard.
Oh yeah.
If that's part of your personal identification, it's kind of hard to have civility.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I guess I'm seeing those as like the extremes on either side. I think even, talking about naming or even bringing up these topics at some of the conferences we do and trying to get to an action statement could be interesting, because I think there's some purple, but I think the purple is often not seen or harvested because it is so dichotomous. But that to me is just one area where I think we're going, because we've seen the waves of different, like adding in different voices. So I think that's a trend line. However that plays out, I don't know. I think that could be an interesting conveners webinar, Devin.
I agree.
To do as another one, like civility at conferences, I think could be a whole hour of discussion.
So some of the questions I'm hearing, because I think you both have surfaced some really important things, and this is what we want our community to be talking about, of what aren't we thinking about and what do we need to address. It started, Heather, with what you brought up about when you ask someone to leave, then what happens? So, we're making these decisions, and then what? What is that?
Right.
Like? How do we come up with a plan about that? And then liability. Yep. I think liability was another one of how do we ensure that leaders are supporting safety so that we can mitigate risks? And what does that look like on stage? That's another question that I heard really here.
Yep.
And then intellectual diversity. If we don't get it right, what are the costs? And given that is a trend that we're seeing happen, and that Heather, you've called out really explicitly, how do we support that? And I think this fourth question is interesting, which is civility of what does it look like to respectfully engage and disengage in different circumstances, given our socio-political economic in the U.S., and what are the implications for the world? Because we're not the center of everything. How do we consider other perspectives that aren't our own and maintain that mutual respect? And I think those are really awesome questions. Part 2 of this conversation that I want to have next month on September 19th is trying to address these questions more specifically. And maybe we can pick one or two. Heather, I know we'll have you on the call next month. I guess I want to hear from you both, like what kind of final thoughts or kind of takeaways are you ruminating on?
I'll let David go first. How about that?
Well, one of the things that this is making me wonder, I feel like there probably is like the kind of the code of conduct concept, and I did stick a link in that maybe what we were talking about.
Yes, I love that you keep doing that. Yeah, it's great.
The the red-blue split and in some sense, I wonder if part of the art would be whatever the code of content, there has to be kind of deliberate messaging that doesn't use the liberal trigger words maybe to define what the environment is, so that people who don't like those terms are still comfortable in the space. And it would be a challenge for me, I think, to try to figure out how to do that, but it's probably probably the kind of challenge I hope somebody else is able to take on. Like what is the kind of the way to, I think there is probably a way to frame, respectful treatment, things that are able to span the divide. But I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
My language would probably not be right.
I think for me, this conversation has just kind of reinvigorated me that I'm going to continue to push our clients to really take hold of that main stage as a messaging platform. And I think we have, as I told you, we have a bunch of conferences coming up. So I think I'm going to reference this conversation and say, this is your opportunity, and it's also your responsibility. I think that to me is also a bigger place. We've done it more of as this would work. You might want to try it. And I think we might become a little more prescriptive, because I think there's a huge gain to be found in setting up parameters for treatment and rules of a culture. And I think there's also liability, a real liability, if you don't, both in reputation and everywhere else. And we haven't even kind of gone into social media liability, reputational liability, where we can give plenty of examples. But I think this has just kind of gotten me more excited about that. And then I'm excited about next month to just delve into a whole bunch of others, and we can go more tactical too, into like the real on the ground risk mitigation and crisis plans. But I think these are more interesting. They're heady risks that society is facing, and that's kind of cool to talk about. So thank you.
Awesome. I'm going to close it here and want to thank you both. I'm going to stop recording, but you're welcome to stay on, and we could just do a closeout if you'd like. So thank you both.